Right, so today I want to talk about this story right here, and it was I made a video on the Don Cherry issue or debacle, whatever you want to call it, and that video went pretty viral, at least for me, not for anyone else. But, anyways, I wanted to make a video about this because it's something that's really an issue. And I mean, in Canada, hockey is the sport. I would say it's probably comparable to football in the States. Like, it's big. Um, Everywhere in Canada, hockey is the sport, no matter where you are. So it's a big thing, and Hockey Night in Canada is obviously the premier, thing on Saturdays. That you have the early games. Usually, Toronto, Montreal, or Ottawa are playing, or more than one of them, and then you have the Western teams at night that play, and so this was, I think it was the second, um, yeah, it would have been the second Hockey Night in Canada without Don Cherry, and the last one they didn't really talk about it, and this one, I mean, they briefly mentioned, but this one, Ron McLean went off on white privilege, and the quote was, "As a general rule, they're often all white, and when they're not all white, the whites often have the speaking part," and as much as it's true to an extent, but I mean, as a general rule, hockey is a sport overwhelmingly played by whites. Like, I mean, yeah, there's some blacks, there's some natives. I mean, maybe there's a couple Asians. I can't think of any, but it's like 90% white, and like, probably 95. And that's not to say that blacks don't have a voice and all this kind of stuff, but the one thing that I wanted to bring up is that this whole thing that I think that they're kind of referring to is the Bill Peters incident or incidents, and what basically happened. I mean, we don't know exactly, and this may not be the case. It may come out that something else happens, is the case later on, but the coach Bill Peters was referring to a player who happened to be black or part black, his music, as he was talking about, turn that n-word stuff off, or n-word what off, and he wasn't referring to the player himself, at least from what I heard. And the big problem with it is that people were talking about, oh, well, should he have been fired, shouldn't he have been fired, and the cancel culture ramifications. And my opinion is he probably, I mean, I'm still kind of on the fence, because I'm not the one who is doing these investigations, figuring out just how bad what he has done is. So, in my mind, I don't think he should have been, but it may be the case that what he did is worse than what I believe, in which case he probably should have been. And in my mind, the one big thing about him, too, is specifically is that when he was confronted on it, he doubled down. He did, like, I think most people would agree that there's a lot of difference between um, saying something racist or whatever, and in the heat of the moment, and when given the chance to apologize, you apologize, and it doesn't happen again, and doing it and not apologizing, because things happen in the heat of the moment. And if you've talked to black hockey players, pretty much every one of them will tell you that, yeah, they've had incidents where people have called them, racist names. But most of them, at least the ones I've heard, and this may not be the case, but at least the ones I've heard, literally say when they bring it up is that most of the time they believe that it's just a heat of the moment thing, that they don't actually mean it. And so the reason why I wanted to bring that up is because the people that are talking about this seem to think that, like, racism is like this horrible, terrible issue in hockey, and it really isn't. Like, no one's like, I mean, yeah, it's probably harder to be a black player than a white player, but you can't change that, because the game's overwhelmingly white, and for the main reason that um, hockey is a game that generally is played in colder climates, and you need more money to be able to afford to play it as a kid, especially nowadays, because if you're a really good player, you basically have to play on the academy teams, the teams that are traveling, you maybe 8-10 hours, across the country, maybe even for tournaments. And if you're dirt poor, well, you can't afford to do that, which is where the basketball or baseball or even football to an extent comes in. Like those sports are a lot cheaper to play. You barely need any equipment, and especially in the States, there's going to be a lot more competition close to you. The problem in Canada is that it's a very, I mean, the States is a very spread out country too, but Canada is spread out and the population isn't as high. So that's kind of the part of that. But the main point I wanted to get at is that I don't think it's a good idea to make hockey become woke, and it kind of is to an extent already. And I think there's going to be backlash. And I mean, you look at a lot of these, the saying "get woke, go broke," and you look at Star Wars. I mean, I'm just naming them off the top of my head because I just watched a video on them. But a lot of these, I mean, what's that movie with the feminist film, that Charlie's Angels? That movie completely flopped too. So the one thing that you need to make clear when you're talking about this kind of stuff is that you can't take it too far, because there's a large majority of the population that can't stand this stuff. And again, it's not that they're racist, it's that they don't like cancel culture, and people shouldn't be losing their jobs over stuff that isn't that big of an issue. Like if you're making, I mean, it's not like someone like Bill Peters. He's probably made millions of dollars. He's going to settle and probably get most, if not all, of his remaining money, so he's fine. The big point being is that the everyday person, that maybe they're living paycheck to paycheck, or maybe they're 2 or 3 missed paychecks away from being in a lot of trouble. So that's kind of the big point here. And the other thing too is that, getting back to the whole white privilege thing, it's not a thing. It's not a thing, because that's in essence racist, because you're saying that because of your skin color, then that means that you have privilege. Well, I knew a lot of really poor white people that had it really bad growing up, like really bad. And you look at, I mean, I knew some kids that were minorities too that had it really good. And I mean, you see this in any area, and that's the problem, that white privilege is in essence a racist term, and the left never acknowledges that. And again, the reason people are probably wondering, well, why do people want to go after whites all the time? Like, what motive do they have? Well, it's pretty simple. I mean, at least in my opinion, they're generally people who are on the left, and whites, especially white men, are overwhelmingly not on the left. If you look at groups of races and sexes, white men, and to a lesser degree whites in general, are one of the least likely groups to vote left. So that's why they're constantly attacked, and that's why whenever someone points out a negative aspect of any group that isn't, that about blacks or about women or about any group that is overwhelmingly on the left, i.e. blacks or women, the left constantly berates you as being racist, even though oftentimes it's true. So basically, that's kind of all I wanted to talk about today, because the point being is that I don't want hockey to go woke, and they're well on their way, and I know a lot of people don't, and if they do, I think that they're going to lose money, and I think they'll lose a lot of viewers. So if you like the video, make sure to hit that like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more.